بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم نحمده ونصلي على رسوله الكريم. We greet you on this the 15th day of the blessed month of Ramadan from my sitting room here in the Caribbean island of Trinidad with Asslammualaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh and Ramadan Kareem. The Jews for the 15th day is Surah Al-Mu'minun and Surah Al-Nur. And of course there's a synchrony between Surah An-Nur, or the Surah of Light, and the full moon. So take a little time tonight to look up in the sky and enjoy the full moon, the beauty of the full moon. Whether you are in Brussels, in Belgium, or in Lagos, in Nigeria, or in Jember, Indonesia, take a little time to look up in the sky and to enjoy the full moon that Allah has given to us. We are explaining to you how to study the Quran and how to connect verses in the Quran and connect subjects in the Quran, because from Surah Al-Waqi'ah we learnt that you have to study the Quran the way you study the stars. Nobody looks at one star to study the stars. You have to study the totality of the stars. You have to see how the stars are interconnected with each other. You have to look for patterns in the sky. And that's the same thing, the same methodology for the study of the Quran. You have to find how the verses of the Quran are connected with each other, and you have to look for patterns in the Quran and then connect them with each other. My teacher of blessed memory, Maulana Dr. Muhammad Fadlur Rahman Ansari, who had Dr. Muhammad Iqbal as his teacher, excuse me, the cough is still with me. Maulana Fadlur Rahman Ansari, in his magnificent book, The Quranic Foundations and Structure of Muslim Society, in 2 volumes. We have that book in the original English, we have it in French, we have it in Urdu now. In that book he taught us that this is the system of meaning of the Quran, looking for the connections and looking for the patterns and seeing how they are interconnected with each other, and you'll get the system of meaning. And we had studied Gog and Magog, and we found that that Gog and Magog were connected with a city. It was Jerusalem. And they're the ones who would bring the Jews back to Jerusalem to recover it as their own 2,000 years after Allah had expelled them. And they would help the Jews to restore a state of Israel in the Holy Land, and that state of Israel will eventually be protected and protected until it eventually becomes so powerful a state that after the Great War, which is around the corner, Israel will replace the United States, or attempt to replace the United States as the next ruling state in the world. When I was saying these things 25 years ago, they laughed at me and they mocked at me. But nobody is laughing now. No. Praise be to Allah. Why does Israel want to rule the world? Pax Judaica. Answer: so that a man would stand up in Jerusalem and declare, I am the Messiah, and al-Masih, but he would not be the Messiah. He would be the false Messiah, Dajjal, the false Messiah. So this is how Gog and Magog took us to Dajjal. And when we want to study the subject of Dajjal, we find that he's not mentioned by name in the Quran. No. And so we have to go first to the Hadith, and there we are told that our Prophet described him, alayhi salatu wasalam, as al-Masih al-Dajjal, or Dajjal, the false Messiah. And he gave us some of the footprints of Dajjal that I mentioned previously. The Dajjal is the master of deception. He can tell monstrous lies and get the sheep and the cattle to believe that it is the truth. He did it on 9/11, yes. And Dajjal is such a master of deception that he takes the road to heaven and makes it look like the road to hell. And he takes the road to hell and makes it look like the road to heaven. How can we protect ourselves from Dajjal? The answer is you got to go to Surah Al-Kahf of the Quran. And that is what our scholarship, Islamic scholarship, has not succeeded in doing. They have not. I am now 83 years of age by the moon and 80 by the sun, and I have traveled extensively. I have met scholars from all over the world, and at this age, this stage in my life, I have to share with you the sad reality that the world of Islamic scholarship has not paid adequate attention to Surah Al-Kahf and have not succeeded in penetrating the surah. It is this surah which introduces us to the methodology for study of the world in order to be able to understand when Dajjal is released into the world and he has his three parts of his shadow. He's released as a shadow before you see him in person. And Allah says in Surah Al-Mursalat, this is our explanation of the surah, of the ayah. You might have another. No need for us to be in a boxing match, is there? أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم انطلقوا إلى ظل ذي ثلاث شعب. Proceed now to a shadow which will come upon the world, and this shadow will have three parts, will emerge in three parts. And we say the shadow is the shadow of Dajjal. And the trademark of Dajjal is that everything connected with him comes in three parts. And when we turn to the world, excuse me, of international politics, we said that in the first stage, in the first part of the shadow of Dajjal, the world experienced Pax Britannica with an obsession with the Holy Land. That's right. And it is the British Army which eventually conquered Jerusalem, and Britain which was then installed as the mandate power in the Holy Land, and Britain who opened the way for the Jews to return to the Holy Land while pretending to keep them out. Deception. And it was Britain who presided over the birth of the State of Israel. But you know the subject already. It is a British commander, British general, who stood up in Jerusalem and declared, today the Crusades are over. So we know that there is this connection between Britain and the Holy Land, Jerusalem, and the Jews. That's Pax Britannica, paving the way for Dajjal. And then Pax Britannica was replaced with Pax America with even more obsession. Inconceivable obsession. You can't explain it. Inexplicable obsession with Israel. That's the United States. The whole of the US Congress obsessed with Israel. An Israeli prime minister stood up and said, we control the United States of America. Yes, and no bombs were dropped on Israel. No. And this is Pax Americana as a second stage of Dajjal, as a shadow. And the third stage, we have offered this view, you may differ with us, is a Pax Judaica. And when the Pax Judaica takes place, then after that, you have a conquest of Constantinople after the Great War, and then Dajjal will appear in person, and he will stand up in Jerusalem and he will declare, I am the Messiah. Many Muslims now understand this clearly because I have been explaining it for 25 years. But you who are my Christian brothers and sisters and who are now listening to me for the first time, you're not familiar with it, so I have to repeat it. This is how Dajjal, who is the Antichrist, first appears as a shadow for a long time, and then the shadow disappears and the Antichrist appears in person, ruling the world from Jerusalem. It won't be a big world at that time, it will be a much smaller world, because the Great War will make the world much smaller. Surah Al-Kahf of the Quran explains to us how to study Dajjal, how to study the world in the age of Dajjal. He has such deception that he takes the road to heaven and he makes it look like the road to hell. And he takes the road to hell and he makes it look like the road to heaven. And the sheep and the cattle would be deceived. This is our subject, the sheep and the cattle. I didn't know we had so many sheep and cattle in the Muslim world until COVID came. I was astonished to see how many huge numbers. Once the government said, you got to put on a face mask if you want to go in the masjid. All of them put on the face mask, like sheep and cattle. Once the government said, you have to stand apart from each other, social distancing, although our Prophet said when you leave a space in between when you stand for prayer, if you're not shoulder to shoulder, then Satan will come and fill that space. But they didn't bother about Muhammad alayhi salam. They didn't care 2 peanuts for him. No, we have to follow the government. And so they stood up like, excuse me, like monkeys. I don't care if they're annoyed with me. No, they stood up like monkeys, performing their prayer in the masjid, social distancing. And the surprise of my life was to find that at a time when the Muslims were like sheep and cattle, including their scholars, I was astonished to find Christian scholars. Not just Christians from the Orthodox Christian world, but Christians from the Western world as well. Christian scholars who showed such magnificent insight into the subject and such immense courage that I couldn't find amongst the Muslims and amongst the scholars of Islam. And I learned a lot by listening to these Christian scholars explaining what was happening in the world of the virus and the vaccine and so on. May Allah bless them. These Christian scholars, not all of them were priests and so on, they were also other people. And they did a magnificent job, and I am proud of them. So Surah Al-Kahf tells us that in akhir zaman, the world will be filled with cattle and sheep, and a lot of them in the world of Islam. Oh yes, a lot of them. They take US dollars and to betray the government of Pakistan, and you have a regime change, and now you have a US dollar backed government in Pakistan installed with US dollars, and the sheep and the cattle can't see that. So Surah Al-Kahf of the Quran has come to explain to you, how do you recognize Dajjal, his footprints? How do you penetrate the reality of the world in the end time? This is a branch of knowledge called epistemology. And in epistemology you study knowledge. What is knowledge? How is knowledge acquired? What are the instruments through which knowledge is acquired? Dajjal has one epistemology, and Surah Al-Kahf gives another epistemology, and this is what we want to speak about in our next session, inshallah. May Allah bless you, that you may study Surah Al-Kahf and penetrate it as it ought to be penetrated, and it may give you the capacity to understand the world in the end time. Thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.